Hello, everybody, to the world. Dr. Land's philosophy class, The Voyage of Philosophy, Unit 27, The Concept of the Being for Itself, Being for Others, and Being Itself by Sartre and Hegel. Today's theme we are going to cover today is the comparison and the application of the Hegel's and the Sartre's concept of being for itself, being for others, and being in itself. Chapter 1. Sartre's being for itself, being for others, and being in itself. The lexical meaning of the word being for itself is a being conscious of its existence. This word originally originated from Hegel's philosophy, but was broadly used and known by Heidegger, Husserl, and in particular Jean-Paul Sartre, a famous existentialist philosopher in France. First of all, let's look at the distinction of existence by Sartre. Look at the photo of Jean-Paul Sartre, a famous French existentialist philosopher who wrote Existence and Nothing. Being for itself and being for in itself by Sartre. The being for itself is a way of existence of consciousness and consists of a purpose-oriented nature with its own activity. On the other hand, being itself is an objective being in opposition to subjective being of man. It is the ordinary things like a tree or a stone, which are self-sufficient, lumpy, and accidental. Sartre also talked about the being for others, which is, in short, my appearance reflected on others. Even if my being for others is derived from being for myself, I can't decide on it because being for others are their thought about me. However, the problem is that the being for itself, that is the way I think of myself, and the being for others, that is the way others see me, are very different. In other words, it is a case where being for itself and being for others are inconsistent. This situation is said to be able to overcome through love. For example, a friend who misunderstands something about me may think I am coward. In this case, there are many ways to solve the problem, but if you are close to each other, you can overcome this gap through love, conversation, and understanding. The other problem is that this being for others can form and decide my being for itself again. In other words, the evaluation or perspective of others about me is fed back to me and considered as if it were my essence. My being for others can influence my being for itself. Being for myself, in other words, I tend to behave myself as they think of me. This is a phenomenon that occurs often because humans are social animals. However, if the discrepancy between being for itself and being for others intensifies, you will be under severe stress. It's a case of a misunderstanding. The German philosopher Heidegger calls a person das Man, that is a secular human being whose being for itself has turned into being for others. In other words, humans who are sensitive to social evaluation forget their own possibility of existence, sein können in German, and live as others or society tells them to. In order to avoid the wrong existence for others and move toward the original self, that is the being for itself, it is sometimes necessary to make a life-risking decision, pioneering decision to death or resolute learning ahead toward death by Heidegger. We see a photo of Martin Heidegger. Heidegger, in his main work Existence and Time, evaluates the daily and the average human being in industrial society as das Man in German. If this is actually difficult, you can rely on the faith of Christianity to discover your original self. In the case of capitalism and in Korea, especially due to the influence of the academic backgroundism and conformity prevalent in society, the turning of being for itself into being for others occurs universally. My essence is determined not by my talents, hobbies, visions, and efforts, but by social evaluation systems, or as Erich Fromm thought, possession determines the existence. There are many cases where the Korean set score or the apartment floor space determines the value and existence of a personality. Sartre's being itself was briefly described above. It refers to all objects and worlds that exist unconsciously. The essential characteristic of the human being is being for itself, that is, consciousness, freedom, and determination. However, Sartre said that humans tend to become being in itself, immediate being, because they are afraid of being for itself. Being for itself is intrinsically alone, independent, and free to decide. Jean-Paul Sartre, human disposition to turn being for itself into being in itself. And in other words, humans sometimes just want to live according to what they are thrown without thinking. In particular, jobs accelerate this tendency. For example, if you work in a job for a long time, you regard it as your essence. My essence is, however, freedom and choice, but I tend to forget it and become being in itself. At one time, there were such concepts of the being in itself people and the being for itself people in the student movement in Korea. The former refer to the people or workers who are said to be socially disadvantaged, robbed, but do not know it, and the latter refer the same people or workers who, however, know that they are exploited by capitalism or the rich men. As a result, they are conscious that capitalism should be overthrown. The social activists want to turn being in itself people into turn for itself people. This effort was called consciousness education. The question is only whether capitalism is really an exploitation of economy. Rather, I think capitalism is a win-win economy for both workers and capitalists. Consciousness education to turn being in itself people into being for itself people. Chapter 2. Hegel's being for itself, being for others, and being itself. Hegel is a philosopher who first developed these concepts. He found these concepts when dealing with the Leibniz monad. Hegel's idea of these concepts is somewhat different from that of Sartre. Hegel is an idealist who thinks the consciousness or the spirit comes before matter or the body. This tradition is one of traditional Western ideas that occurs since Plato. In other words, it is an idea that prioritizes the mind over matter. First of all, Hegel discovered or created concepts of the being for itself and the being for others while writing his main work, Phenomenology of Spirit. This is a great contribution of Hegel to the Western metaphysics in my view. In the 20th century, Heidegger of German talked about the oblivion of being, Seinsvergessenheit in German, claiming that he was the only one who knew the true meaning of the being in the 2,500 years of the history of Western philosophy. However, Heidegger's bold assertion of the oblivion of being is misunderstanding in my view. Further, a concept of being which adapts only to human being cannot be ontological, because ontological or metaphysical concept must be able to apply to all beings. Heidegger's concept of the existence applies only to human being. It is Dasein in German. No matter how much the being of humans is important, a concept that is only for humans can never be universal concept, so the philosophy of only human being can't be ontology or metaphysics. It's, so to speak, philosophical anthropology or ethics. Therefore, Heidegger's book, Being and Time, should be viewed not as ontology but as anthropology or ethics in German philosophy. This opinion was held also by Professor W. Janke in Wuppertal University. In contrast to Heidegger, a great German philosopher, Hegel discovered these new categories of metaphysics such as being for itself and being for others. This was further developed in the later generation and contributes to philosophy of Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, and Simone de Beauvoir. Unlike Heidegger's being of their being Dasein, Hegel's concept of being for itself and being for others are real ontological concepts. It is universal concept that can be applied to all things in the universe, including humans. They are also basic concepts that can be applied to all other branches of science besides philosophy. The concept of pair of being for itself and being for others is a discovery comparable to those of form and matter, actuality and possibility by Plato and Aristotle, and that of existence and essence in the medieval philosophy. Hegel's being for itself and being for others are the products of the idealistic philosophy. The idealism values the subject consciousness rather than object matter. Prior to German idealism, French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes, the founder of the modern philosophy, said, "I am thinking, therefore I am." He said and used the certainty of my existence as the basis for all knowledge. The thought means that even if you can doubt all things in the world, the universe, God, or other beings, you can never doubt your own existence as a thinking or doubting. I still think this is right. Immanuel Kant, the originator of German idealism, argues for the constructivism of the knowledge created by giving the form of human understanding to the sensory data given from outside. It's like pressing the dough with a noodle machine to make noodles. Here, his juniors, Fichte and Hegel, took one more step. In other words, even matter or object were actually created by the activity of understanding. Therefore, there is nothing that precedes understanding or the thinking ego. They oppose to Kant's things in themselves, Ding-an-Jihi. They argue that knowledge is the process in which the mind becomes a material for itself from the beginning and forms it in more detail. In this process, consciousness and the spirit were considered the most important and fundamental beings. From this point of view, Hegel puts consciousness first and sees it as a unity. The world and the matter are complex, but the spirit has been counted traditionally as a simplicity, unity in the West. This is also called self-identity. Today, the self-identity of man is greatly endangered in industrial mass society. Hegel also regards the identity of consciousness as being for itself. However, for itself turns into being for others to the others. The problem is that the being for itself is disturbed by being for others. In other words, my self-identity cannot be preserved as it appears immediately. However, the disturbance of my self-identity or being for itself through the others is not only negative but also positive. This is the point. Man becomes mature through the interference of others, for example, that of parents. In Hegel's terminology, the individual consciousness is elevated into the universal consciousness through the conflict and the struggle with others. In this regard, the discrepancy between being for itself and being for others is not necessarily negative, as it is the case with Sartre. Being for others can be more truthful than being for itself. Being in itself by Hegel. Unlike Sartre, being in itself has a universal meaning by Hegel. Not only the object of the things matters, but also the subject consciousness can be being in itself. Its meaning is intrinsic, implicit, authentic, or potential. Therefore, being itself refers to the essence of things. Chapter 3, Conclusion. Above, we compare the Sartre's concept of the being for itself, being for others, and being itself with those of Hegel. For Hegel, they are universal categories which can be applied to everything. On the contrary, for Sartre, these concepts are personal and existential. I think it's the difference between the philosophy that emphasizes us and the philosophy that emphasizes me. That's it. Today's lecture. Thank you very much for your attention. See you again.